All right, with us today is George Allen, and he's here at the Sadler truck stop, and he's going to tell us a little bit about why he's here today.
Well, I'm going to be here with Mr. Sadler and Hermie and Elliot Sadler and talk about fuel prices. I see the prices here are, $3.95 at Racing and $3.97 here. So the prices are high. And one of the things, if people hire me on to serve them in the U.S. Senate, one of the key issues I'm going to be like a dog on a bone on is energy. And we, as we're sitting here amongst meals, we ought to be thanking God that we're blessed with more energy resources.
Right.
Than
Give us some examples of what you do.
All right, number one, day one, I've introduced a bill to allow us in Virginia to produce oil and natural gas off of our coast. The federal government, the White House, has been saying no to Virginia. And if we were able to do that, we'd be able to get 37.5% of the royalties, and I think they ought to be used for roads and transportation. Second,
where would the crude that they get go to?
We have a refinery right now that's shutting down in Yorktown, so it could either be put into a pipeline. I'd prefer to go into a refinery, and there's a refinery in Yorktown, and that would help our prices. There'd be over 2,000 jobs created in Virginia, and we'd be getting 37.5% of the royalties. That's $250 million a year that I think ought to go to roads and transportation. Number two, what I would do.
What do we do with the gas that they're producing now and we're sending out of the country?
You're talking about fuel?
Fuel, because crude oil...
As opposed to natural gas. That's why I just want to make sure what you're saying.
Yeah, because you're here for fuel prices.
Right.
Right.
Well, if we had more production here in the United States, the prices would be lower. And here's your prime example.
But we're exporting gasoline now.
Some does go into the Gulf of Mexico.
A lot of it goes there.
And from the Gulf of Mexico gets from, say, Venezuela and elsewhere. It comes into our country, and our refineries send it elsewhere. The point of the matter is if we're having our own U.S., we're not having to import it from somewhere else. Second, I want to go through all the things that I would do. Secondly, I would stop the EPA from in effect banning coal. They have a proposal that would in effect stop coal from being used as a reliable, affordable American source for electricity. Third,
let's get back to gasoline prices.
Okay, and I would also force approval of the Keystone Pipeline. If we're not going to use U.S. oil, I'd just as soon be importing it from a reliable friend and neighbor, Canada, rather than some of these hostile countries we're vulnerable to.
Well, the Keystone Pipeline is sending that most down to the Gulf Coast,
well, that's
right?
Where the refinery. Well, we go to refineries in the Midwest and ultimately to Texas, where Texas and Louisiana is where most of the refineries are.
And that's where most of the exports are leaving our country from.
Yeah. Would you want to ban exports from our country?
No, but we know that with crude oil that produced in the United States cannot be exported by law. Is that correct? But once it's refined, it can be exported.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, you would, if you're going to export it, you would want it refined because you get that value added. For example, last time I was here at Sadler's truck stop, I remember seeing a bunch of logging trucks coming through here. Of course, logging business, forestry business is pretty tough these days with the housing business being down. Now, wouldn't you rather be exporting furniture than raw logs to China or somewhere where they mill them and turn them into furniture or whatever they're going to use it for? And there's that logic. There was a vote. That's interesting. You asked that question. I'm also in favor of allowing us to explore on the barren north slope of Alaska. My opponent, the Democrats, are against that. There was a vote on that to say that oil from Alaska would stay in the United States of America for a somewhat similar question that you're asking, Bruce.
Do we have enough?
Unfortunately, we got
No, wait a minute. Do we have enough fuel in the United States right now?
Do we have enough fuel in the United States right now?
Mm-hmm.
We could have enough from the United States and, well, you could say North America. Take the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We could have enough fuel as far as oil is concerned to power our country, and we would not have to get any from Venezuela. We wouldn't have to get any from the Middle East. So we have the ability, really, and America's #1 in the world when it comes to overall energy resources, thanks to our plentiful coal. We're the Saudi Arabia of the world when it comes to coal, 3 times over. And we're finding much more natural gas, the shale gas. And here's your prime example, Bruce. Shale gas, when I was in the Senate 6 years ago, there was all this concern we're running out of natural gas. In fact, they were creating, trying to build liquefied natural gas facilities to import natural gas into this country. Now we have so much natural gas. The price of natural gas is at a historic low. It's less than $2 as far as their measurements. And if anybody's got a liquefied natural gas facility, they'd be exporting it because we have so much here. Because of that, we have low prices, which is good for any of us who, in our house, we heat with natural gas. It'll be good for manufacturing of tires and plastics and chemicals and fertilizers, and those manufacturers use a lot of natural gas. That's their number one cost.
Got another quick question for you. Your press person gave me an idea that you're going to talk about what Obama's not doing that you're going to do.
Yeah.
What can he do now that you want to do later?
What he could do right now
Yep.
is stop saying no to Virginia and saying yes to Virginia and allowing us to produce natural gas and oil off our coast. What he could do right now is say yes to the Keystone Pipeline, which he has been saying no. They've studied it now for 3 years, and Tim Kaine and President Obama continue to stall and say no to the Keystone Pipeline. He could say yes, say no to EPA and tell EPA they're not going to regulate CO2, which in effect would ban coal. And coal means jobs in Virginia, from the coal fields to where they manufacture coal rail cars in Roanoke, to our ports in Virginia, and for all of us it means affordable electricity as well. So those are 3 things right there.
When it comes to the price of gasoline at the pump, what does the world condition have to do with our price at the pump?
It's a factor.
How much of a factor do you think it is?
Here's your key factors. Mostly it's supply and demand, and and world demand. It's not just U.S. demand; it's world demand, because oil can be shipped to Asia, to India, to Brazil, to Europe, Africa, and elsewhere. So it's mostly a supply and demand situation. It is one that, again, if we were using our own resources, we'd be keeping that money here in the United States of America, and hundreds of thousands of good, new good paying jobs would be created. That's oil, natural gas, and coal. The other factor is
back to the world condition.
Yeah, and then there's a worry on future supplies, and you do have the worry about what's going to happen with Iran and the Straits of Hormuz. Another factor, third factor, is the strength of the dollar. And the dollar right now is weak because of the creditworthiness of our country has been downgraded for the first time ever, and they have every year over $1 trillion in annual deficits. And so the weakness of the dollar, worries about what would happen elsewhere in the world, and supply and demand are your 3 key factors. Don't ask me to say, well, one part of it's 10% and another one's 20%, and the other and supply and demand is 70%. The worry on speculation for the U.S., if we were utilizing our own assets here, our reserves, our energy reserves, and getting them from North America, from Canada, and from the U.S., then we wouldn't have that vulnerability to outside forces. We would be worrying about a disruption of supply because we'd have that supply here and wouldn't have to worry about it.
What I don't understand is, if we're exporting gasoline, that we've already, why aren't we keeping it here to keep our prices lower now?
We can follow up with
No, hang on a second.
Because there's not a restriction, a legal restriction on people, corn, for example, or.
Are you suggesting that maybe that there could be a restriction coming along if you get in the Senate that would?
The only one that I voted on was on the North Slope of Alaska one that I felt that ought to stay in the United States. Any country in the world, we ought to thank God that we have more than anyone else. We ought to be unleashing, and we have it. Bruce even asked me this question earlier. What would I do? On day one, I would introduce a bill to allow us in Virginia to produce oil and gas off our coast. Right now, the White House says no. That means we'd have jobs.